We're actually live, but the show hasn't started yet.
Right.
They'll do this thing.
So viewers will be trickling in, right? Or is that?
Yeah.
That's the theory.
Streaming sound yet, or no? Do you like click on the sound when you're ready?
Whenever Carmen turns it on, and sometimes it's a surprise.
Yeah,
right.
never trust a microphone. It's
That's
always
right.
loud.
Yeah, right.
It's always hot.
Yes.
Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific Time. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or on YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems. And by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As you'll notice, John's not here, but because he's not here, I brought some excellent support in for me. I've got my friend Drew Winter, who is the Senior Content Director of Ward's Auto.
Yep. That's close enough. Yeah.
Close enough. He's got so many titles.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And we've got Mike Austin back, who is now joining us from Hemmings.com.
Yes.
So just give us a brief thing. What are you up to now?
Talking about old cars, but I think a lot of people think Hemmings is maybe kind of an old person's thing, and we're going to evolve that. We're not going to leave anything behind, but just expand it. To be honest, I didn't even realize until I got there how much is in the classifieds and like how much depth of knowledge there is. So, taking this great old brand and reminding people that it's around.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously they've got a young guy who is going to be.
I'm glad you think I'm young.
I think you're. And our very special guest today is Mike Cicco, who is the president and CEO of FANUC America. Mm-hmm. And we're very glad you're here. And before we start asking you questions, I want to remind the audience that you can send questions in. You can either do this doing it by email, and it's viewer mail, all one word, at autoline.tv, or do it via the YouTube chat, or call us at 620-288-6546. That's 620-288-6546, and we'll try to get your questions answered. So while many of you may not be familiar with FANUC America, I guess a simple way of saying this is that you run a robot company.
It's true. It's true. Well, first and foremost, we say FANUC. I was just in Germany at the EMO show. I'm just off a plane from that, and all the Germans like to say FANUC, but for whatever reason, we say FANUC. But yeah, I'm in charge of FANUC America, so we run North and South America, and we're the leading supplier of industrial robots as well as CNC controls for machine tools.
So what is an industrial robot compared to a Roomba or something we'd see in a movie? I mean,
that's a great question. For industrial robotics, we'd like to think of things that we have a trained person that's actually working the robot. When you think of robots, commercialized robots like a Roomba or something that gets put in a box, put on a store shelf, and gets sold to a consumer who takes it out of the box and uses it. Industrial robots are typically used by trained individuals. That's not to say that industrial robots aren't starting to show up into other areas. We have robots that flip hamburgers in restaurants. We have robots that are picking fruit from farms, but they're all industrialized and they're all used by trained individuals. So they're still spreading out into new industries.
Mm-hmm. So these are basically in the auto space, since we're interested in that, versus we like to eat hamburgers, but
sure, we won't talk about that part.
We'll skip that part. But so the auto industry has historically been the industry where robots have found their niche, as it were.
Absolutely, it's where robots were born. The automotive industry is what gave birth to the industrial robotics industry, and it's still today. It's still today, 40 plus years later, the number one industry for the utilization of industrial robots as well.
Yeah, I just saw some recent numbers that, according to the Robotic Industries Association, that year to date, the growth in automotive is 83%. And second was semiconductors and electronics at 12%. So I mean, the enormity of automotive implementation of these things is
Absolutely.
huge.
So I know I've followed the robot industry for a long time, and I know when it really started growing big in the 80s and 90s, we saw it being used. It took over the jobs that people really were very tough jobs, like working in paint shops and welding operations and things that were difficult and dangerous jobs. I think now paint plants and welding shops are almost 100% automated in most factories around the world. If you're growing, then where are you growing now from sort of these traditional applications of industrial robots?
Yeah, sure, Drew. It's a good question. And as you mentioned, paint shops and body shops were the first spots. Number one, because it was a very dangerous area. Handling a weld gun or a paint gun from the environmental standpoint was a big deal. As that progressed and continued to grow, now we're starting to see new areas. So being able to automate, say, a weld shop and a body shop enabled the automakers to do different things with vehicles than they were before because that part was automated. And we started focusing in on other areas. Powertrain's probably the next one after that was kind of in the 90s of the machines were there to make the parts, gear hobby machines and machine tools that were making engine blocks and engine crankshafts and heads and things like that. But the automation that we added to then automatically tend those machines, that made all of those plants much more efficient. We added a lot of automation that tested the engines so that they came out of the plants much more reliable. And so then you have body shops automated, paint shops, powertrain, and now kind of the last frontier is general assembly. And that gets into something that's very customized per the automaker, per the vehicle itself, and is kind of our next challenge in terms of finding ways to automate that part of the plant.
So that leads perfectly into the question I have, because I went to GM's Tonawanda engine plant, and that is a lot of automation, including one station where a big robot arm is moving a block around and spinning it to do lots of quality assurance checks. And it's it's obvious a robot arm is much better at that because it can lift an engine block. When you get into these newer areas and you talk about general assembly, is there a line where is there a line where robots maybe have a limit where you go, this is going to be better with a hand assembly or a human eye on it?
Absolutely. We are always looking at things from that aspect of you shouldn't take an application where having a person do it is better and then and automate it. You don't want it worse in the end. You want it better. To solve that problem, some of the areas, and we're just starting to get into this more and more, but because of that, because in general assembly there are so many things that people are best at, we needed to find ways to have the robots and the people work closer together. And so the introduction or the invention of a collaborative robot, which is instead of having the robots in one big fenced-in area and the people over here, now you can start to have the robots and the people work hand in hand. And so maybe in that application you were talking about an engine block, but think of something maybe a little bit smaller, maybe 50 pounds or so, where a robot could pick it up and present it to you as a human operator, and you could do a whole bunch of things on that 50-pound part. We don't want our people picking up 50-pound parts all day, so the robot handles that part of it, person does the people part of it, and then the robot finishes it off by handling that around. And so that's a lot of where we're focusing in on in general assembly, is just trying to see what's best to have robots do the things that the robots are good at and people do the things that the people are good at.
Yeah, I think one of the things that perhaps people in general don't understand is that a spot welding gun is heavy and it's huge and it's very difficult to deal with.
Right.
And putting it on the end of a automated machine makes a whole lot of sense. Being in a paint booth, I mean, you don't really want to be there a lot. I mean, even if you're wearing a respirator, I mean, it's still a problem. Therefore, robots make absolute sense there.
Right.
And to the point of the engine block thing, you guys have very strict rules in terms of safety, in terms of keeping the robots behind fences, that the robot stops if the fence opens and things to protect people, because these are big things. But you're talking now about almost a revolution in terms of some of this equipment. I mean, it's the collaborative robot is different than those big arms we're used to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
I mean, there's still physics that comes into play. So not to get too engineering on everybody, but you still have forces, mass times acceleration. So if you're working by a robot that needs to be able to stop if it touches you, there's a limit on how much weight that robot can pick up if that's the way you're going to stop it. So if you have a robot that can pick up 50 pounds, inherently the robot has to go kind of slow, because if you're going to hit anything with 50 pounds, it's going to hurt if you go fast. So you tend to see these robots have a little bit lighter payloads, so they can't pick up engine blocks because you wouldn't want to get hit with an engine block no matter what. So it is a different process, and automakers and us and engineers and integrators, everybody in our industry is trying to find that right balance of when to use non-collaborative robots, when to use collaborative robots, and almost specifically what applications are the collaborative robots going to be good at. And that's still a process that we continue to work through.
So what gives them the ability to collaborate? Is it sensors, vision, artificial intelligence, or how do they go from sort of machines we'd be frightened to work right next to ones that would be more like a coworker that you wouldn't be afraid of?
Yeah, to answer, it's all of the above, really. You mentioned a lot of the really perfect ways that we do it today. So there are sensors in the robots to allow it to stop if it feels you if it stops. There's a tremendous amount of sensing technology out there now that can see if a person is close by, and then the robots can stop moving if you get close. And then there's also a lot of new now, this AI mindset of creating ways where the robot's going to learn things over time, where as time goes on, it's going to get better and better at its job, as another horizon that we're looking at in the future too.
We have a question from the audience. The Pete Glock, I think that's the way it's pronounced. Is there a way to automate the final inspection in car production?
Sure. That's a great question too. Mike said he saw at Tonawanda where a robot was picking up an engine block and moving it around for various inspection points. So we have cameras. So we make our own cameras that can look at things. We do it all the time, where we'll put a camera on the end of a robot and look at, say, a completed engine, and we can tell if the spark plugs are installed. We can tell if the cables are routed right. We can tell if every bolt has been inserted. There's also special sensors at the end of a paint shop that look for defects in the paint, where we can actually automatically fix those defects in a paint shop. And then at the very, very final assembly, I think that we have automation that can look at for big defects. In some ways, you still can't get past the human eye, so you may still need people to do the very, very final, but we've automated a lot of that over time.
So it can be done.
Absolutely, yeah.
And perhaps is being done.
Is being done in a lot of different ways, sure. I still think the automakers will still put a person at the end just for that absolute final check before the car drives off the line.
You mentioned that you make your own cameras. I mean, for a long time, vision was a big challenge for robotics in terms of being able to. They know where they are in space in terms of their programming, but in terms of being able to see things and follow weld lines, is that all solved?
I may not ever be totally solved, and there's a lot of this is where a lot of the AI comes into play, is in the sensing field. But I'm 20 years in the industry now, and I started through those challenges with industrial vision. And just in my time as an engineer and then moving up within FANUC, we've gotten to where two-dimensional vision was a science project for people. And now two-dimensional vision, I mean, you just throw it on kind of, it's an easy one. So now we're into three-dimensional vision. We're into three-dimensional vision plus additional sensors to give you more information. And now part of the AI technology is we're doing three-dimensional vision where the robot uses a neural network to figure out its own successes and failures, and can teach itself how to use 3D vision to pick things out of a container. Wow. And so, yeah, it's gotten pretty far.
I was going to say, so in that spectrum of, early days of robotics where you're saying, move this far and then move this far, literal lines of code, to something from the user side where you might say, pick this up and put it over there, and that's the only command you give it. Where are we now, and where are we moving in like the next 5 years?
So we're certainly to the pick it up there and put it over there. And because we've built a digital twin of what the robot has in what the robot actually is in its environment is, because there's already a digital twin with CAD of all those things. You can say, I need to pick up that thing over there and put it there, and then the robot figures out all the obstacles in its way. We're already to the point, as I mentioned before, where there's 3D cameras that could be in this space now. There could be a robot in the middle here just moving, and the camera would be sensing us, and it knows where it's gonna go and how far it could go before I got to it, and the robot would be speeding up and slowing down with all of us standing around it. And so there's industrial safety vision systems that go around it. So we're pretty far into that right now where the robot can almost figure everything out on its own.
So are we ever going to get to like the lights out factory where it's all robots? I mean, maybe like for final assembly, for example.
Final assembly would be tough, but certainly in powertrain and in areas like that, it already exists. I mean, there's areas in plants where there's almost the lights do go out and there's very few people.
Okay, we've got a whole lot of questions here from the audience. The people really want to know a lot about robots, let me tell you that. But first we have to take a break. So see our friends at Bridgestone. Okay, we're back with Mike Cicco of FANUC. Did I say it right this time?
FANUC.
FANUC.
We'll get it.
We'll get it. I've only been saying this for like 30 years.
Yeah, that's all right.
All right. The robot man wants to know, this is boy, he's teeing it up for you here. What makes FANUC robots better than KUKA ABB or Kawasaki?
Wow.
Oh.
Wow.
It's the yellow paint.
Tough one. That's a tough one.
Does it say where that guy works? He works at KUKA ABB. Reliability and service is something that we stand first and foremost above. I'm not going to be on TV saying we're better than the others. Obviously, I think FANUC's an excellent company. I've worked there my entire career, and but service and support is really where when people need you to be there and you need the robots to be reliable, that's what's happening. That's what FANUC gives you. But thanks for that.
Okay, KC Auto Doctor wants to know, are there any plans to use your newly acquired company, Life Robotics Cobots, in the auto industry?
No, good question. You follow the news pretty closely on that. That's a small company that we acquired in Japan. They have some interesting technology that we're still investigating right now, so probably a little too early to talk about that one, if we're going to use that technology or not.
Okay, this goes to Mike's earlier point here. George Jin wants to know, when the engine block is spinning and pivoting on the robot, what is the thought process behind the spins and pivots?
Well, the one I saw, it was doing inspections for tolerances. So it's just a matter of moving it so it's facing the sensors for.
So it's just presenting,
yeah.
Okay, look at this, now look at this.
Yeah, after you machine an engine block, you could either leave it in the machine and do some inspection on it there, but that takes away the machining time. I think what we do there is take it out and present it to, we use the robot to present it to a number of different sensors.
Okay. Mike Flowers wants to know, can you make a robot that can buff a clear coat smooth?
That's interesting. It's also something we're looking into right now.
So is this a real problem? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see the orange peel on bigger bigger volume cars. You'll get a little bit of orange peel to where really obsessive people will give a brand new car a wet sand to smooth it out.
That's right. So there's some cool technology there that already exists. Probably on TV, can't talk about where it exists right now, but that process to do that, to make the clear coat smooth, already exists with one of the OEMs.
This is refreshing as I'm speaking here. So I'm not sure who this comes from, so I'm sorry whoever wrote this. How much growth have you seen in the cobot sector in the last couple of years due to the labor shortage?
That's a good question. We've actually seen a tremendous growth overall because of the labor shortage. So the lack of skilled workers is something that's affecting our industry. It's positive and negative. Obviously, if from me personally, if someone buys more robots, that's good for us. But the fact that we don't have enough skilled laborers is a problem for everybody. But we have seen an increase in automation because of it. relating it directly to cobots, cobots are something that people are still trying to figure out where they belong. The marketplace, in terms of the overall robotics market, the cobot piece of it is still pretty small. It's a pretty small area. And it's also something where people look at, our cobots are green, and people think that's the only piece of the market. But what's been happening over time is that we use our other robots in collaborative ways too. So I mentioned all those different sensors and different technology that we have. So you can have a big, heavy, dangerous robot also collaborate with a person if you have the right safety measures in place. So that part has been growing quite a bit, where we have a lot more robots that are collaborating with their human counterparts because we're bringing those things together. We're identifying what the people are good at and what the robots are good at. So yeah, I would say the labor shortage is affecting our business quite a bit.
Okay, and that was Kyle Mahan was the one who asked that question. One more before I throw it back to these guys. Mike Flower, Brent McKinney wants to know, could the robot make a Mai Tai for the operator once the shift bell goes off?
Well, I will say, and I'm going to put a plug for something we did. If you want to watch the game tonight, the Jacksonville Jaguars play the Tennessee Titans, and due to our partnership and cooperation with Flexingate, Shahid Khan, Mr. Shahid Khan owns Flexingate and also owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so we have 3 robots at the stadium in Jacksonville. One of them serves beer. So if you're ever in Jacksonville and you want to go down there, you can get a robot poured from a beer poured from a FANUC robot. So making Mai Tais probably isn't going to be that much more challenging.
You know, so you mentioned that you just came back from a big manufacturing technology show in Germany, the EMO show. And presumably you talked to lots of people in the auto industry over there. What's the sense of, you know, we saw the big introduction of the ID.3 from Volkswagen electric vehicle, the Taycan,
Porsche.
the Porsche. Is there a lot of buzz about the electrification and the implications that has on manufacturing?
Absolutely, yeah. It was the talk. There's a major portion of that talk there. So the show I went to was specifically geared towards machine tools, which cut things out of metal, primarily engines and transmissions. Drives a big part of that industry, and the move towards electrification, especially pure electrification cars, obviously takes that engine and transmission out of the car and goes to a battery and a motor. And so the number of machined parts that exist in a fully electric car are vastly smaller than what exists in an internal combustion engine car. So everyone's waiting to see what happens there, at least right now, because the production levels of internal combustion engine cars are still at pretty high levels. Machines are still getting purchased and parts are still getting made. But I will say the level of investment of developing new technologies has certainly shifted towards electrification and away from some of the internal combustion engine programs that are out there.
Yeah, because we're hearing automakers now, I think BMW was one of them, or others are saying, well, we're on our last internal combustion engines. We're not going to do anymore. So they're going to continue obviously building and machining and whatnot the engines they have. But what they're saying is, you know, there's not going to be another product cycle for internal combustion engines, which that tells you engines last 8, 10 years or longer, but it's definitely putting an end to a huge segment of, well, a huge part of the auto industry, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say if that happens, then it will.
Yeah.
But that's still a pretty big if right now.
Yeah.
But the investment levels for now is happening. There is a shift now where when the OEMs are dedicating their talent to things, it's getting dedicated towards electrification.
What are the implications for you guys?
Well, for us, when somebody wants to buy a robot, it's because there's a new program out there. So our business is not driven by how many millions of vehicles that the OEMs make. Our business is driven by how many new programs that the OEMs do. So they invest in automation when you want to change something or make something new. And so when we see that difference in investment, and I'm going to use the same transmission that I used before, I'm going to use the same size engine I used before, as I said before, our robots are very reliable and they last a long time, so it means that that does affect the purchase of new automation. That being said, to make a battery pack in the bottom of a car requires a tremendous amount of automation. And so parts of our business have shifted, and we're very active and do a very good job in the automation of electrification. And then there's a tremendous amount of automation there. Machining-wise, for machine tools is not as much, but from an automation standpoint, there's still a tremendous amount of automation needed to put batteries together and put the packs together and put the packs in part of the tray, and you have to weld the tray, and there's a tremendous amount.
Yeah, they actually have thousands of parts, actually.
Right.
And then they have to be sealed, and then there's all, well,
Yeah.
they're a lot more complicated than people think.
Well, you've seen the videos of what happens when when something bad happens to a car that's the whole bottom of it's filled with lithium-ion batteries, and you see these spontaneous fires that happen. Those pieces need to be put together very, very reliably, or else, yeah, having lithium-ion batteries sitting underneath you could get dangerous. So,
Let me ask you, so you have presumably business with all of the automakers that produce things in the United States, and your sister companies around the world have equal participation with other OEMs. Is there a difference between how auto company A and auto company B uses robots, or is it pretty much a common approach nowadays?
no, there's differences. I will say I hope we work with everybody, but if there's someone that we're not working with out there, they can call me, right?
That's right.
So, okay, so if there's someone we're not working with, you can call me. But no, there are definitely differences in approaches. Maybe one of the easiest ones to talk about is some of the materials that you're using just in a body shop now, where just in the last few years you hear about everyone was making steel cars, steel stampings get welded together and they make cars, and we switched to aluminum, and now we have magnesium, and now we have carbon fiber and 3D printed parts. And each OEM has a little bit different approach to that, and that drastically changes how that body shop gets put together, whether you can't weld the car together anymore because it's made of aluminum. You have to join the car together with screws or rivets. Or if you introduce carbon fiber, then you have to use adhesives instead of welding. And so depending on and that's just on the body of the car. So that, and as well as a lot of other differences. Sure, there's a lot of differences, and we actually have people that are focused on each individual OEM and tier to try to figure out what those nuances are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're coming to the bottom. You guys, any final questions for Mike?
Oh, yeah. So, when you think about internal combustion engines sunsetting at some period long off in the future, maybe not that long, but at some point the cars on the road will still be around. And, I'm in and around classic cars a lot, and there's a huge aftermarket of that, just in terms of the money people spend on it and the way the industry is going. Is there a role where you could see a robot making it into even like a medium-sized shop, like somebody that does a lot of paint? Because you usually, if you're outside of a factory, you don't see an automated paint booth that much, or you don't see, an automated mill for refinishing an engine or something like that. Is that somewhere where you guys are looking to expand, or there's a possibility for that?
No, not to disagree with you on TV, but
No.
there actually, that market, saying that there aren't as many of those, there are hundreds of thousands of automated machine tool tending robots and automated paint shops out there for that. So but it's growing. I would say, we're still probably in the single digits of percentage of robots that we put on machine tools that go outside of automotive, but there's a lot. So yes, that's a big market, and it's going to keep getting bigger, that smaller shops are going to automate more, because I see that business, like you said, for classic cars, people are going to start making other parts for old cars. Yep.
Thanks.
Drew?
You mentioned earlier about the labor shortage, and that's very real. Unions and the public in general used to be very afraid of robots taking over their job or taking over their plant or whatnot. Given the effects of the labor shortage, that there are a lot of jobs that nobody wants to do. Yep. Is there less concern about it, or do you still have oppositions from unions about robotics?
No, actually, what we do now, and I think the unions would agree, is we provide a way for all workers, unionized workers and non, to make a much higher salary, to give them a lot more challenging work where, like you mentioned, the jobs that are automated today are things that people did not want to do or that we had a hard time or that were too dangerous for people anyway. So we spend a tremendous amount of energy educating young people coming through the trades. We have robots in high schools that are teaching kids what manufacturing, robotic manufacturing looks like at that age, up into the 2-year associate's degree program. So no, I think the unions embrace what we do because we give their members a chance to earn a higher wage, to add more, and really lead a more fulfilling career by whether it's a robot technician or a robot programmer or operating multiple robotic cells. It really is it's a good spot for those people. So certainly there's always a transition as if you're changing the labor force from one side to another. But no, so far things have been very positive.
Great. Well, Mike Cicco, FANUC America.
You got it.
Got it this time right. So I really want to thank you. I mean, this is a subject that we don't get into here, and I think people would be surprised at how many robots build the cars that they're driving at this very moment. So
Sounds great. Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot
very
for
much.
having me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
I appreciate it. Yeah,
all right,
sounds
so we're
good.
going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from Lear in Borg Warner, and I will come back with a number for these guys, and I'm guessing they're not going to get this one. So we'll be right back.
Lear Connexus offers a parental controls application with geofencing that sends notifications regarding driving behavior and location, including curfew alerts, acceleration alerts, and speed alerts, all delivered to a smartphone application that includes vehicle location, driver notifications, and a report card of driving history, including notifications when predefined geographic boundaries are crossed. For more information, visit Lear.com.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
And we're back. That was quite fascinating, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, once again, it's technology that is fundamentally important to the auto industry, but doesn't get talked about a lot.
Well, I think they talked about up at the management briefing seminars in Traverse City that they should just think of a new way to talk about manufacturing, you know, about making things or something that makes younger people not get like totally turned off immediately by it.
Right. And, yeah, it's a big challenge. So speaking of big challenges, I've got some numbers that I want you guys to think about. So Katie, could you please bring up the first number? All right, so over a 5-year period, the following groups by age spend the following amounts of money. So from 18 to 34-year-olds, they spend $2,334, 35 to 44, $1,978, 45 to 54, $2,135, and over 55, $1,654. Now, this is related to the auto industry. This has automotive implications. And again, this is a cumulative 5-year period. So this is all added up over a period of time. So what might
Over 5 years?
over 5 years? So basically, I thought about doing it if you divided those numbers by 5, then you'd have what their yearly spend is, except for the fact that this is not necessarily a constant, so it's not a yearly spend.
Oh, I was thinking it might be car insurance, but it's not that.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe it was something to do with driving, like, you know, fast food or convenience stores. But that clue of it not being constant is,
Well, people don't eat fast food constantly,
yes, it's true. But
so they may go on a binge.
I'm stumped.
Stumped?
Yeah.
This one is Katie? Car repair. So I thought about that in terms of, you know, that you're dealing with older vehicles now. And
I spend that a year.
That was $400 a year seems pretty reasonable actually.
It does.
Yeah.
And so, Katie, was there a third one, or is just the two? So go back to the first one, please. So, I mean, it astonishes me that the younger ones spend more money than any other category.
Well, they're buying the oldest used cars, I'm guessing. They've got
That's a good thought.
they've got the hand-me-downs and the beaters that require it. But yeah, my God, I spend on my older cars spend $2,000 a year.
Really?
Just keeping them in good shape. You know,
Well,
brake jobs and things like that.
I was going to say, if you have we have longer oil change intervals, but if you have even a mid-level car that requires synthetic oil, you're talking like $70 for a change on that alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Then brake jobs.
So that was, I mean, the thing that really surprised me about the thing when I looked at the numbers, I thought it was fairly low. I mean, over a 5-year
Yeah.
period, I mean, someone spending $2,000 over 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, you get one major repair, right?
Yeah.
And that takes care of a good percentage of that.
I mean, my wife's car is we've had that for 4 years, and I do most of the service. We take it in every once in a while to make sure that the dealer's looking at stuff, and we're well under that average.
Yeah.
So I think it might be emblematic of how reliable modern cars are and how you never have to touch them.
Or is it repairs specifically, like being in an accident or something like that?
Good point. It's not maintenance.
If it's not maintenance, then I think that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Moving right along to the news, boy, this was a
Yeah.
big week for news. Where do we begin? So the UAW went on strike against General Motors.
Yeah.
What's happening there? I mean, it was. I thought it was fairly interesting that I was looking at the GM website and thought I'd get some insights into what was going on there. And so on the 16th, there was the GM statement on UAW negotiations. I'm going to read it to you.
Okay.
This is a quote. Negotiations have resumed. Our goal remains to reach an agreement that builds a stronger future for our employees and our businesses. That was it. I mean, like nothing else.
Yeah.
So where are they? Do you guys have any idea?
I don't, but I think there's two things going on. I mean, there's a lot of talk. There has to be a fairly long strike just for symbolic reasons to show that the UAW leadership, for one, which is now facing a lot of corruption charges, to show that they still are fighting for their members for good deals. And then I think other things where you have the Lordstown plant in Ohio being shut down, some other high-profile plant shutdowns, the UAW has to, I think, somehow try to fight back against the automaker, show them that they're not going to take these type of plant shutdowns lying down. So, I mean, I think there's a symbolic nature to it where they feel they have to have a significant strike.
And on the other side, GM is. I have this weird feeling that we're back in like the big strikes of like 1998, where it went like a month or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember how long that was, but GM canceled healthcare payments for all their union workers. So now, if you're in the union, you have to pick up COBRA coverage or some other healthcare marketplace coverage while they're on strike. And the union has a fund for this, and they'll be paying it. But that's a pretty aggressive move on GM's part. And to me, that kind of signals that both sides are really ready to go pretty hard at this, and it might last a while.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's a while?
I could say at least 3 weeks, and
3
maybe
weeks.
I'd say 2 at least, yeah.
Really? I mean, that'll have, huge consequences. I mean, not only on the individuals, but I mean on the economy, which seems to be slowing down as we speak.
Except a lot of the plants are not running at capacity. So, I mean, what we could see after 3 weeks is then everything gets cranked up, overtime. Automakers could probably make up the production that they're losing, and suppliers, and so ultimately the workers get overtime, and they could catch up as the inventories are sold down. So I think if it goes, a lot of those things that are being lost in terms of the money people are talking about could be made up.
The thing that's kind of fascinating to me is one of the big sticking points is healthcare. That the UAW health insurance, they pay a tiny fraction of their actual healthcare costs. The GM's asking them for more. I think this is also related to the Ford and FCA talks as well. And GM wanted them to go to 15%, I think, and they're at like 3
or 4%.
And the average in the rest of the country is somewhere around 20, 25 or 30. It's interesting that that's one of the parts they're fighting so hard for, given how far away it is from the average non-automotive worker. But also, to me, it strikes this sort of thing where here's a place where the automaker and the union can work together and go lobby the government to work, to say, listen, healthcare costs are too much. This is killing our business.
Right.
Because, I mean, employers are as much a victim, I think, of soaring healthcare costs as private citizens are. But I thought when I heard on the radio workers complaining, that they have to pay more than 3 or 4%, and they don't have hardly any copays or deductibles now, I think they're losing touch a bit with the middle class. I mean, I think they're not going to. With the teachers' strike, I think they really created something new for unionism because a lot of people could sympathize with teachers. They don't make much. They have to buy their own supplies for school, for their classes. But here are auto workers, GM auto workers who are complaining about corporate greed. Fine, but they all got $11,000 bonus checks last year. It's not like they didn't benefit at all from General Motors' good profits.
Right.
They also have these fantastic benefits that the rest of the middle class doesn't really have anything close to that. So I think the UAW has to be careful there from sounding out of touch or getting sympathy from the middle class with some of the things they're complaining about.
So speaking of the government, speaking of jobs, and speaking of the auto industry, I want to read here, this was a series of tweets that came out yesterday. So I'm going to read the series as one. The Trump administration is revoking California's federal waiver on emissions in order to produce far less expensive cars for the consumer, while at the same time making the car substantially safer, all in caps. This will lead to more production because of this pricing and safety advantage, and also due to the fact that older, highly polluting cars will be replaced by new, extremely environmental-friendly cars. There will be very little difference in emissions between California's standard and the new U.S. standard, but the cars will be far safer and much less expensive. Many more cars will be produced under the new and uniform standard, meaning significantly more jobs. Automakers should seize this opportunity because without this alternative to California, you will be out of business. And that was from President Trump.
Holy cow. That is hallucinatory. I mean, we listen from people who know the industry. Every new car is safer than the next one, thanks to the latest sensors, airbag technology, and everything else. Smaller cars now, just a generation of smaller cars now are far safer than much larger vehicles that are 4 years or more older. The logic behind that is so twisted that I can't fathom how I could say.
And let me just throw one more element in this before you say something, Mike. So last week, the Department of Justice began an antitrust investigation against Volkswagen, BMW, Ford, and Honda because they signed on with California. Yeah. So what's going on?
I mean, for me, it's the motive is very strange, other than just, a straight grudge because against, the state of California. Because, first of all, emissions and safety aren't necessarily tied together. These automakers, they have long lead times. They have, large development lifetimes for the things that they build, especially when it comes to powertrain. And they also have a global market to compete against. So they're typically building stuff. Meeting the California emission isn't necessarily that much more of a challenge than meeting a relaxed emission. And the big question I have is, okay, so say we did have relaxed emissions. Are automakers going to go back? They're going to backslide. Is there going to be something cheaper? And here's the thing: even if it is cheaper, they're not going to pass that on to the customer. It's not going to make cars any cheaper. Trucks have had a bunch of loopholes, environmental and crash and so on for ages, and now they're the most expensive thing on the road. They're going to, automakers are scraping every penny they can get. And emissions, relaxation of emissions would not lower the price of cars, I don't think.
The last thing automakers want is a bunch of different emissions regulations to deal with throughout the world. What they'd like to see is, some sort of global harmony, and the rest of the globe is not backing off on of emissions. So we have global. It's a global industry, global platforms. They want some unity in there. But I think the first key that's something wrong here is that the automakers themselves are saying that the regulations or this deregulation has gone too far. I can't ever remember automakers complaining about being deregulated. I mean,
Well, so you raised an interesting point here about the rest of the world. Okay, so I looked, and so the regulations in Europe, which are going to call for 95 grams per kilometer as you travel this year, right? And the China regulations now, according to the International Council on Clean Transportation, the China 6 standard is one of the most stringent emission standards around the world for the post-2020 timeframe. So basically what we're seeing is that vehicles that are built and sold in those two giant markets are going to be held to a higher standard than U.S. vehicles would be. So does that put us behind the 8 ball in some ways if we pull back?
I mean, maybe you have a scenario where you have an older, cheaper, less efficient engine in one market, and then you have the newer, presumably more expensive stuff in another market. But I think there's enough competitive aggression among the automakers that the ones that can, they're always looking to deliver more power, more fuel economy. It doesn't always, make sense in terms of like, if you buy a hybrid, it doesn't pay off in fuel savings at current gas prices. But I'm just so skeptical that the automakers would take advantage of a deregulation to backslide and in terms of, decontenting or defeaturing a car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one area I can see, I can't believe I've been a frequent critic of California regulations. I can't believe I'm defending California, but really, the one area where this might be beneficial to automakers is the mandate for electric vehicles in California and 13 other states that follow their regulations. Those have always been, California has continued to wanting to force automakers to sell a certain portion of battery electric vehicles. And the demand, aside from Teslas, for battery electric vehicles just isn't there yet, at least for automakers. So forcing automakers to sell vehicles that consumers don't necessarily buy, if you take that out of the equation, that would help automakers from their perspective, because they wouldn't be losing, like Sergio Marchionne once said, they were losing $14,000 on every $20,000 or $30,000 EV that they sold in California. That could be a benefit, but I cannot understand how the rest of this is going. It's certainly, there's nothing that's going to make the vehicle safer than a steady progression of new vehicles.
It was interesting, the claim about less expensive. According to Consumer Reports, which the last I checked was not some left-wing publication, did an analysis and found that the plan to freeze fuel efficiency standards would set consumers back around $3,300 per vehicle in net costs. So anyway, speaking of the demand for electric vehicles, however, today Jeff Bezos announced that Amazon will be buying 100,000 electric trucks from Rivian. And this is part of their plan to reduce their carbon emissions by 2030, signing on to the Paris Accords and doing their own thing. So basically, they're going to start in 2021, then they'll ramp up from there. But 100,000 vehicles, electric vehicles from Rivian. Is that going to make a change in terms of, I think that part of the problem with Marchionne's thing was, if you're not doing this at scale,
right,
it's like making jewelry.
Yes.
And so if you go to visit Tiffany's, it's like a hell of a lot more expensive than going to Target.
Yeah.
So when we start pumping these things out, is that going to change? the equation.
Well, the biggest concern automakers have about EVs now is the market is there going to be demand for them? Suddenly, here's somebody's like created demand already. So then you can go to suppliers, you can scale up, Rivian now can scale up their supply chain. They already have a factory there. They can buy the tools. They're going to have money coming in. I mean, this is just, they may be the first really successful, or the second after Tesla, electric vehicle manufacturer that's really going to take off. I mean, everyone else is out there is looking to lose money on EVs for they don't know how long. Mm-hmm. But now you've got this built-in order that's probably going to then lead to new orders from other manufacturers saying, okay, this is a real thing. They're going to make these vehicles. There's a market for them. There's supply chain. There's going to be repair parts, all this other thing that this is going to be, I think, a big leap for the electric vehicle industry.
Well, it's huge news for Rivian because, 100,000 out of the gate they don't have the truck yet. So we don't know how much time it's going to be or if they're going to, start the factory on time. But having that built in, it's sort of like having a government contract back in the 60s or 70s. You have this built-in layer of payment and much like some old government defense programs, Amazon is known to spend money to do something and then figure out how to make it more profitable as they go. And this could very well be that. They just say, listen, we want to cut our carbon emissions. We're going to take the hit on it. And the other interesting thing about it, though, is it's this Amazon. Amazon does this approach in a lot of things. They built their own servers so that they could host their site, and then they have excess server capacity, and then they're really good at building servers, and now most of the internet is on an Amazon server. If you look around, Amazon, they deliver Prime in a day in most markets now. There's those, trucks driving all around all the time. There's a lot of Amazon trucks on the road. If you switch them all to EV, that's significant in terms of how much fuel they're using.
Mm-hmm. And then nobody can complain about Amazon because they're driving electric trucks, right?
Right. Well, I mean, and so, Kit Gerhardt wants to know, will Rivian be able to get all the batteries they'll need? They could order them from Amazon.
Yeah.
Get them over there, get them overnight.
Well, that's one of the two big things that people say, like, oh, we can't electrify everything. We don't have the infrastructure and we don't have the battery supply. Infrastructure is not an issue because it's a fleet. They presumably all charge back at a home base. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, if you're going to add another 100,000 units, there's going to be more battery plants.
Well, and that was part of really Tesla's original strategy was their battery packs are made up of, thousands of laptop batteries, which, are already scaled up.
Right.
And so then they figured out ways to, turn them into a battery pack. Mm-hmm. And so, now with sort of this guaranteed volume there, certainly they could find a supplier and scale up.
I think that the Panasonic factory in Nevada, the partner with Tesla, has excess capacity right now.
The Gigafactory?
Yeah, so
it's probably not. I'm sure they probably thought about that. I mean, but speaking of fuel, we had the drone strike on the oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, which took out a percentage of the available.
Yeah, 5% of, yeah.
Right. How is that looking in terms of, I mean, if something breaks out over there, what's going to happen to gas prices here, do you think?
I think they'll go up. And I think most of the major gas crises we've had, certainly in the 70s, they had nothing to do with fuel supply. They were all political, related to wars or embargoes or whatever. In 2008, I think it had something to do with, I'm not sure anybody figured out what happened in 2008, but if this would normally, I mean, going back 10 or 15 years, it'd be a catastrophe, I think, and we'd see people panicking. But now, with fracking in the U.S. becoming, I think, the largest exporter of oil, or certainly petroleum, or a huge, less of an impact, but I think it will. And that could definitely, I think, get people thinking more about fuel efficiency again, which they really aren't now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't looked at how much crude oil prices have gone up, but obviously they've gone up more than just a 5% supply issue would suggest. And that's the problem with this is anytime there's a ripple in production, the reaction is always much larger.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if, if we have those frequent, we've seen like way back in 2008 when Prius sales shot up and truck sales stopped. I'd be interested to see if that's going to happen. There's almost no effect in the last week, though.
No, but I mean, if there's already drumbeats now of a possible war. I mean, if a war breaks out with Iran, that definitely could have people worried about $4 or $5 a gallon gasoline again.
And so to the point about what the United States does, according to the U.S. Government Energy Information Administration, the U.S. still imports about 7 million barrels of crude oil per day. Okay, and they're saying as a result of this circumstance, a tighter global crude oil market and increased global crude oil prices will ultimately increase the price of crude oil and transportation fuels in the United States. I mean, so these guys are basically saying that, yeah, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And to the point of the fracking and so on. I mean, one of the consequences of low gas prices has been that many of these wells have not been economically feasible.
Right.
So they shut them down, right?
Yeah.
And the EIA also points out it'll take more than 30 days to get a lot of this stuff ramped up.
Yeah.
So there could be real battery shortages.
Yeah.
Another thing that happened this week, and we're drawing to a close. Speaking of California, there's been this concern about the drivers for Lyft and Uber, and that whether these people are being appropriately remunerated by these companies. And so California passed a bill, and Gavin Newsom signed the bill this week, AB 5, which basically is, it says roughly there's a test that it gets applied. So for a hiring entity to legally classify a worker as an independent contractor must prove the worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity. I don't think so if you're driving an Uber. Performs work outside the scope of the entity's business and is regularly engaged in work of some independently established trade or other similar business. And this was according to TechCrunch. So basically, they're going to become more or less employees. What is your sense of the effect this is going to have on the ride-hailing business?
I think it could have, this whole idea that people aren't going to buy cars anymore and they're just going to do ride-hailing. That business model, I think, could become a lot less strong. When you're going to essentially, going to start paying more for Ubers, I assume, or all these. I mean, I think that could really probably cause all the ride-hailing and all the car sharing, cause that to quiet down some.
I think it's kind of, it seems to me that it's accelerating this sort of adolescence into adulthood of the gig economy.
Yeah.
That, you have all these startups and they have this great idea and it's predicated on either losing investment money and somehow making it up on scale that doesn't always get there, or taking advantage of the fact that people can do something on the side and they're willing to spend their time for a little bit of money. With these ride-sharing services, especially when they started, it's like a $15 ride from the airport. When if I'm driving my own car, it's costing me $3 in gas alone, let alone insurance and all that stuff that, people might have not realized that they weren't really making money, even if it was putting cash in their pocket. This, it's a good worker protection because it prevents people from unknowingly participating in a false economy in terms of, losing money on beating up their car, putting miles on their car. But also, I think it just comes back to the fact that, you can't get from A to B without certain realities that you need to face. And one of those is paying someone at least minimum wage.
So finally, speaking of paying people minimum wage, and this also goes to the state of California. This is sort of a theme here, California. We heard earlier from Mike that he started his career with FANUC in California, and we've been talking all about California. So Waymo got permission by the state of California to run a pilot robo-taxi service in California. And in 1 month, okay, in July, it had a fleet that ran 4,678 trips and logged 59,886 miles. 1 month robo-taxi service in California by Waymo. That sounds to me like it's getting pretty real.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know about this one. So, like, where are they traveling? You know, we have May Mobility has parking lot shuttles in Detroit, and it goes along, you know, slow cities routes. I think that if you don't see them, it's not really front of mind. I don't know if people realize how much these cars are already here, but so far they're in fairly controlled settings, even when they're on public roads. So it sounds like this is taking that next leap and getting a little more sophisticated.
Right.
Yeah, they still have a safety driver in there, though.
Yeah.
Right, and everything.
Yeah.
But again, this could accelerate since I think Uber's already has lost $1 billion. I mean, they're not making money, right? They lost like $1 billion or whatever. I think that could definitely have the Ubers in the world and whatnot saying, yeah, let's push ahead with automation now. And since that makes everything that they're spending on autonomy, suddenly if they're going to, the driver becomes more expensive, that could speed autonomy. But then again, the robot doesn't pay for its own gas, pay for its own tires and insurance and things. So I don't know that equation, but I think that definitely could. There's a lot of folks at Uber thinking maybe we got to move faster.
It's very clever that you got back to robots as we wrap up the show.
Yes.
I like that a lot. That really put a nice bow on the subject. Since this has been our technology deep dive, I think this show can be characterized as being so. Drew Winter, wardsauto.com, right?
Fine, yeah, sure. That's where you'll find us.
That's where you'll find Mike Austin, Hemmings.com.
Yes, and Hemmings Auctions and Hemmings Motor News and Muscle Machines and Classic Car. There's a lot of stuff.
Drew could start rolling out with other titles.
Oh,
they
yes, we do conferences, intelligence data.
This would be like a battle of the brands here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, regardless of all that, I want to thank you very much. You made this a great show for me, and I appreciate it. So thank you all for watching. And John will be back here next week with me, and we'll be doing another show. So have a good day.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems. And by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons, get your daily news fix with Autoline Daily, and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at autoline.tv.